brand is just something that signifies who made it, who stands behind it. That's what a brand is. What I talk about is brand equity and what a brand is worth. I recently developed something called the 5Bs to emphasize that branding is more rich and more deep than you might think. It used to be that branding is just awareness and image. It's a communication problem. What I say is that brand equity is three things. It's not awareness anymore, it's brand relevance. And second, it's brand image, but maybe an expanded view of what we think of image. And three, it includes brand loyalty as well. The idea of brand relevance is it's not enough to be visible. You have to be visible in the right setting, the right context, and you have to be credible. So you have to be credible that you can make, say, a hybrid compact. And if you are credible and you decide to start to make electric cars, you have to do it all over again. You have to be credible in that space. You have to be visible in that space. The second is image, and it's more than functional benefits. It involves social benefits, self-expressive benefits, and emotional benefits. And it involves a connection, a relationship you have that can be based on respect and admiration and even inspiration, as well as a transactional, functional thing. But the third thing is the most important for branding, and that is it involves brand loyalty. The value of your brand is really based, in most cases, on the size and intensity of the loyalty of your customer base. That gets branding into, when it first emerged in the early 1990s, it really changed everything, because brand loyalty puts you in charge of the whole customer journey. It gets you involved in R&D. What are you going to invent? It gets you involved in customer insights and segmentation. It becomes a C-suite activity. In the 1990s, we had chief marketing officers and we had VPs of marketing that now we're at the executive table. They're not just delegated to interacting with an agency who would do all the heavy lifting. Mm-hmm. That's what brand equity is for me, and that's how I talk about branding.
David, when we think about the equity of any brand, the equity of a company, a product, or service, how does it actually influence the behaviors of people? Is this something that's embedded within us as humans?
It comes down to the buying decision and the use experience. Both are influenced by brand, and so you think of the brand experience as something logical and rational and so forth. And there are people that argue that brands don't matter as much anymore because now people have Google and they have AI and they can learn all about the brand and all its specifications and so on. Mm-hmm. The reality is that when it comes to a decision, even if you're deciding what airline and manufacturer to use, or if you're deciding what surgical equipment to buy, or if you're deciding what kind of yogurt you want. The reality is that people rarely have the motivation or the time to actually do research. Mm-hmm. And it's also true even when they do that research, whether it's airplanes or automobiles or yogurt, they, at the end of the day, they're kind of overwhelmed with data and analysis, and they go with their instinct.
Yeah.
Brand,
yeah.
Do you trust this brand? Is it going to do what it says? Does it deliver? And then when it comes to the use experience, your use experience really not only is something that defines how you think of the brand, it's affected by what you think of the brand. So if you think the brand is fun to drive, it's going to be fun to drive. I mean, if you don't think it's fun to drive, it's never going to come to your mind. And so
right.
If you have the ultimate driving machine under you, then you're more likely to enjoy the fun. You're going to enjoy the moment. And if you don't have that image and relationship with your car, you won't. So it's going to affect the use experience also.
David, I had a really interesting conversation with a neuroscientist, and one of the things that she said, so this is Dr. Bryn Weingart, she said that especially in high stakes decision making, the human brain actually defaults more to instinct and emotional feeling than logical, rational reasoning, which was such a big mind flip for me because I always feel like, oh, if you're in a high stakes situation, if you're a surgeon, if you're in the Navy SEALs, you're making very logical decisions. It's actually flipped, actually the other way. So I think what you're saying is that we have to be mindful of the experience, of the emotions of the people we're trying to influence, and branding and brand equity and the fees can totally help to move that along.
That's really fascinating, and I would love to get her endorsed, but it doesn't surprise me.
Right. Because I feel like um, when when humans make decisions and even the experience of our lives, we talk about Minnesota and thinking back to the past, like the meaning that we place on things are the stories that we tell ourselves and not actual logical fact, right? It's not the truth. We're not interested in the truth as humans. This is the stories that we tell, the experiences, the things that we, say to ourselves. And that's, I feel, where branding is really powerful if done right. Like you said, if done right, if everything's aligned. But if you say one thing but your experience is another, it actually hurts the trust and credibility of your product or company.
Yes, that's true for sure. Yeah, you can't promise anything you can't deliver, and it's not only a matter of delivering it; it's being credible. It's having people believe you can deliver on it.
What is really interesting, David, is I don't know if a lot of people, when they hear the word brand, understand that there are all these different facets that can help you, build a brand. And the thing is, you need all these different things, whether it's symbols, whether it's, taglines, whether it's stories. It's not a one and done thing. Do you feel like over the decades of work, in this world, David, like people get it or do they not get it still?
Well, one of the reasons I added a fifth B, one B is brand equity, and then there's brand relevance, brand image, and brand loyalty. But the fifth B is brand portfolio. Because what I find in going into organizations is the most common branding error is under branding. And I ask people, for example, what is your secret sauce? What are your employees really proud of? What do you do special that others don't do? What really is differentiating to you? I mean, a lot of things you do a little bit better, but what's really differentiating? And then they can give me a 3 or 4 minute, very articulate, very passionate description of what that is. And then I ask, why don't you brand it? Or if it's branded, why don't you elevate that brand and resource it and leverage it?
And David, when you say brand it, what do you mean?
Put a label on it. Give it a cognitive anchor. And again, going back to Uniqlo, they have developed an enormous team of brands. This is kind of before they went global. They still were 400 or 500 stores in Japan, but in 1998, the fleece market was really the popular thing. Everybody's getting these puffy jackets all over the world, but especially in Japan. And they were very high end, very expensive. And so Uniqlo came out and worked with a company called Toray Industries, and they came out with a different fabric that was cheaper to make. They also had the vertically integrated company, so they can control logistics and manufacturing and everything. And they had very simple designs. Nothing fancy.
I'm a huge fan, David. I'm a huge fan.
And they came out with a product that was 20% of the price of these competitors. 1/5. Can you imagine? And it was really high quality. And so the sales exploded. They sold 1 million copies of these, I think, the first year. In only 10 years, they sold like hundreds of millions of units. But anyway, in in the ensuing 2 years, they basically took over the fleece market. And it was a growing and huge market. And they did this with a really low price. So then they're sitting there and they're saying, how can we, the bad of this is that we're known as a low price place, the place you go for cheap stuff.
Right.
And we don't
that's
want
the association. Yeah.
We don't want to be that. So what can we do? And the second thing, they made three decisions at the time. That was one of them. The other was to go global. And the third was to develop new fleece-like fabrics. They made a deal in 2000. The CEO of Uniqlo and the CEO of Toray Industries decided they would be a team and they'd put out new fabrics for the clothing industry. Uniqlo would say these are the customer problems, and Toray would create fabrics that would deal with them, and Uniqlo would get a design and put it on the shelves. Their first product was called Heat-Tech. Came out 3 years later, and Heat-Tech was something that was thinner than the really puffy stuff, and it was very effective at retaining heat, really effective, and it changed the industry. And they in the next 10 years they sold 300 million of items with Heat-Tech in them. It was in like hundreds of apparel items, and it was branded. Right. They branded a fabric.
They called it something. They branded it. They had a story about it.
Heat-Tech.
Right.
And they subsequently branded a couple of other things. One of them was called Airism, which was 10 years later, 2013, which allowed you to create thin fabrics that were cool in the summertime. They used these fabrics to really tell a story. To tell the story that they were innovative, that they were leaders in fabrics. They were the only retailer to do that. The second thing they did was to brand their culture. And they have these really high standards within the stores, and they were expanding stores that half the employees were new. So they branded their culture, and one of the brands was called Zen in Kea. And what that meant was every employee is a boss. Every employee is a strategist. Every employee has the ability to make decisions to improve the process, the layout, the whatever, and they had the power to implement that decision. They could do it. They didn't have to get approvals all over the place. They had the power to do that. The second one was Global One. And they were on the, now they have 1,700 global stores or something, and they're opening at a fast rate, but they wanted this whole organization to be one. And so they did all these things to promote people sharing ideas, sharing knowledge, working together. And actually, in 2010 to 12, they institute, for the first time in Japan, I think, everybody had to speak English in company materials. It was and that came out of Global One. Then in 2013, it still wasn't enough to tell the story, because even though the global scene hadn't participated in fleece, they were seeing products that were breathtakingly cheap as opposed to Gap or as opposed to H&M. So it was still a challenge to avoid just being a cheap place to buy. So they did something remarkable. Instead of trying to reinvent Uniqlo, the retailing brand, which was, by the way, a Japanese name, and so you have that, and which sort of signifies cheap to some people because of their heritage, going way back to the early Toyotas. They wanted to tell this larger story. They wanted to have a higher business purpose, and they just feel they couldn't do it. And they certainly no way could dump the Uniqlo name. That wouldn't be possible. Just think of the signage alone. But so what they developed is a business brand. They called it Lifewear. And they developed this business brand with all the signage and all the messaging. And this was the umbrella that talked about the fabric brands, the culture brands, and the sponsorship brands. These tennis stars that were sponsors, they all came under the Lifewear umbrella. And that was a vehicle to tell the whole story, to give it energy, to give it purpose, and so forth. They developed in 2017, they developed a newsletter. They published a paper twice a year that told the story of these fabrics and the in-store experience, but also talked about art, talked about designers, it talked about tennis players, tennis tournaments, and so there was that. And they came out with an exposition. They did 5 of them. One was in Paris, one was in London, one was in Shanghai, and 2 were in New York, one at the Museum of Modern Art. In that the 5-day thing, they talked all about the Uniqlo brand and all the sub-brands and so on. The point is, it takes a team of brands. You just can't do that by telling, we're Uniqlo and we have this new fabric that we'll put in clothes for you. We have this fabric that will cool clothes with them. Without the brand, it's hard to communicate.